أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. قالت الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا ولما يدخل الإيمان في قلوبكم وإن تطيعوا الله ورسوله لا يلدكم من أعمالكم شيئا إن الله غفور رحيم. صدق الله العظيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. سبحانك لا علم لنا. يا أيها الناس, O people of mankind, O mankind, إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى. Verily we have created you from a single male and female, Adam and Hawa alayhim salam. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلًا, and we have made you into nations and various tribes, لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that you may get to know one another. إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ, verily the most honored amongst you, عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ, in the sight of Allah, the most honored of you in the eyes of Allah, أَتْقَاكُمْ, is the one with the most taqwa. إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلِيمٌ خَبِيرٌ, verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all knowing and khabir, all aware. And only He knows who has the best taqwa. قالت الأعراب آمنا, the nomadic Arab tribes, they claimed that آمنا, we have brought iman. قل, rather say to them, لم تؤمنوا, you do not have iman yet. ولكن قولوا, rather say أسلمنا, that we have brought Islam, we have accepted. وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ, and Iman hasn't truly entered your hearts yet. وَإِن تُطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ, and if you wholeheartedly obey Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, لَا يَلِدْكُمْ مِنْ أَعْمَالِكُمْ شَيْئًا, He will not reduce anything in the least from the reward of your good deeds. Inna Allah ghafurur rahim, verily Allah is the most forgiving, Rahim, and the most merciful. Before we get into the tafseer of these verses that I recited, in the previous dars, we went over some ayat in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions the etiquettes to the Muslim ummah, to the Muslim community, when they intermingle with one another. Keyword, when they intermingle with one another. And the first etiquette that Allah mentioned, it was لا يسخر قوم من قوم, that men should not mock other men. And then in the next, or in the second line, the next line, Allah then separately mentions وَلَا نِسَاءٌ مِّن نِسَاءٍ, and neither the ladies, the women, should mock or make fun of other women, other ladies. One interesting point that I want to bring to your attention is that many places, several places rather in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He commands the Muslim Ummah, He does not separate the men and the women. But in this particular verse, Allah, He separated them in one verse, not in two separate verses, in one verse. The question is, why was there a need for that? When He could have generalized that command and could have said, Muslims should not mock other Muslims, and done. And that would include within it men and women. But the Mufassirun have mentioned a beautiful wisdom behind this, out of the many and several and limitless wisdoms in the Quran, that since these etiquettes were related to when the Muslims intermingle with one another face to face, and it was inconceivable, unimaginable, that men and women would intermingle with one another in a Muslim society. Because you can only mock the other person when you are face to face with them. So it was inconceivable that men would mock other women or women would mock men. And that would only be possible if they are socializing, sitting with one another face to face. And as I said, that was something which could not be fathomed in the Muslim society. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he based and founded the Muslim society on haya. And haya is such a fundamental aspect of your iman, of our iman. If it is removed from the heart, then there is no iman. It is impossible to have iman but have no haya. At the same time, it is impossible to have haya and have no iman. They go side by side. They are joined together. You cannot separate the two. So it has been mentioned in many narrations where the women would pray in Masjid al-Nabwi. And many people misquote these ahadith without looking and asking the ulama, or without looking at the scholar, our heritage of our ulama through thousands of years. How did they apply these ahadith and how did they understand them? Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, first thing that he told the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, and Aisha radiyallahu anha mentions this hadith, that the women and men of Banu Israel, they used to pray together until they violated the limitations that their prophets had set for them. And the women started to look at the men, and the men started to look at the women. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala completely forbade them and prohibited them from praying in the worship places together. But Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, what he did was, he made it such that the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum would pray behind him. Behind the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, the children would line up. And then in the very back of the masjid, the woman would come after all the men had entered and the children had aligned up. When they were facing the Qibla, and no one dared to look back. This was the first principle, that nobody was allowed to turn around and look back. Until Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would say salam, and he would wait and sit in his position until all the women had left Masjid al-Nabwi, and then he would turn around and the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum were permitted to get up and leave and go about their businesses. And this chapter has been mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari under the title, the name of Babu Sur'ati Insirafin Nisa wa Qillati Maqamihinna fil Masajid. The translation is the hastiness of the women in leaving after the prayers and the shortness of their time spent in the masjid. Many questions are arising in your mind, I will get to them. So the first principle that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam set for the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, it was that nobody was allowed to misuse their eyesight, their gaze. So this was the first thing. The second thing was, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam made and advised for a separate entrance, from which Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhu says, and his student narrates this, that since that separation of the door was made in Masjid al-Nabwi, and it's still there till this time today, right? He said, in my entire life, that Nafi radiyallahu anhu, his student says, I never saw Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhuma enter through that door. The carefulness of the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. If Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted, he could have gathered the women and the men left and right. But he didn't. First thing, to prevent and protect their hearts from emotions and feelings. And second, to protect their gaze. So visibility was almost absent. But then there were some people who violated this principle. The munafiqun, who purposely would pray in the back of the men, in the back rows, so they could get a peep at the women praying in the back. There were some young women who would pray, who were attractive. The Sahaba radiyallahu anhu would move forward so they would not even think or dare to look back or even think. Whereas the munafiqun, they would take advantage of that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala found that so serious that He did not command Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam to tell them. He directly revealed verses to warn them. وَلَقَدْ عَلِمْنَا الْمُسْتَقْدِمِينَ مِنْكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, I know the ones who go forward in the sufuf, in the rows, to protect themselves and their hearts. And I know those who stay in the back, meaning the munafiqun. And this has been mentioned in Tafseer of Bahr al-Mu'iti. So these were the two principles that the scholars have extrapolated from the ahadith. Until later times came in the time of Umar radiyallahu anhu. And much, much later, when these limitations that were set up on a condition that they will not be violated, when they started to be violated, and fitna became more prominent in society, Aisha radiyallahu anha said, going back to the hadith of Banu Israel, which I mentioned, the principle that was there, and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam affirmed it, that if conditions get and the fitna, it becomes prevalent, then we will go back to the first principle. Aisha radiyallahu anha mentions this hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari. She says, had Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam seen what has befallen the women of today, 1400 years ago, he would have prevented them from coming. As Banu Israel, their women were prevented from coming to the worship places. And the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, though they had the utmost morals and purity, that Allah bear witness about the purity of their hearts. Allah said in Surah Al-Ahzab to the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, وَإِذَا سَأَلْتُمُوهُنَّ مَتَاعًا, that when you have to ask your mothers, the believers, as wives of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, about a matter related to deen or dunya, when you have to ask a matter, فَاسْأَلُوهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَاءِ حِجَابٍ, ask them behind the curtains. Though they're your mothers, ask them behind the curtains. Why? ذَلِكُمْ أَطْهَرُ لِقُلُوبِكُمْ, it's more pure for your hearts, though they have the purest hearts. وَقُلُوبِهِنْ, and pure for the hearts of the wives of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The purest of people, and Allah is saying, still uphold that standard. Now the question is, the need will always be there to educate the women, as they are half of this ummah. As the mother is the first madrasa of a child. Now in our times, men have failed this responsibility to educate their wives, their daughters, and have not realized the importance of this. So it has become a sort of a necessity, rather a need, that women have to attend such gatherings of knowledge where they may be educated, they have to be educated about their deen so they can pass it on to their children, pass it on to their daughters. Because the deen of the man only stays till the threshold of the house, till the door. But as for the mother, if she has deen in her life, it will continue in generations to come. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what did he do? He assigned different homes of different days where all the women would gather, and then he would advise them and lecture them with a curtain. And there would be separate gatherings for them throughout the week where they would also come and learn from him. But in today's time, as I said, this responsibility we have failed. So it's the responsibility of first and foremost the ulama and those in leadership of the Muslim affairs to arrange such gatherings where women can come and learn comfortably without compromising the principles that were set up not by just Aisha radiyallahu anha, not just by Umar radiyallahu anhu, not just by Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, but the scholars from over 1,000 years till this time. We cannot ignore how they upheld that standard just because we're living in the West, just because we're living in the UK or in America. We have to uphold our principle. We are an ummah of principles. And they are only good for us. ذَلِكُمْ أَطْهَرُ لِقُلُوبِكُمْ. This is more pure for your hearts. وَقُلُوبِهِمْ, and their hearts. So as I said, the solution is that we have to provide such an environment that is conducive to their iman and does not compromise the principle. Today's verses that I recited, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He addresses the entire mankind by saying, Ya ayyuhan nas. Before this we have been discussing, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu. Oh, you who believe. Over here Allah is addressing the entire mankind. Does anyone know what is the first call in the Quran? Does anyone know what is the first call in the Quran by Ya ayyuhal ladhina? Anyone? It's Ya ayyuhan nas. It has been mentioned 20 times in the Quran, and the first call in the Quran, awwalu nida'in fil Quran, is Ya ayyuhan nas, to tell us, to show us, this Quran is not limited to the Muslim, the believers only. It is a message for the entire mankind, till the day of Qiyamah, for every person from every background and walk of life. So over here Allah is addressing the entire mankind by saying Ya ayyuhan nas, and this is mostly mentioned in the Makki surahs. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. I have created you from one male, Adam alayhi salam, and one female, Hawa alayhi salam. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ, and we have made you shu'uban. Sha'ab in the Arabic language is when a large group of people live in the same land. As today we call it a country or a nation. وَقَبَائِلَ, and that country, it divides more into the subcategories, into tribes and various clans. Why? لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that you may recognize one another, so that you may appreciate one another. See, every race has some qualities that another race can learn from. Every nation has some good qualities that another nation can learn from. Not so that we may mock one another and so that we may look down upon another. Rather, we learn from one another. Our cultures, the way we dress, the way we live. There's so many things that people who live in Africa have, that the people who live in Southeast Asia do not have, we can learn from. So many people that have the qualities in Uzbekistan, in those states, that the people of Arab can learn from. And so many qualities the Arab countries, those people have, that the people of the West can learn from. The Muslims living in the West, or the Muslims who are living in Europe or in South Africa. In other words, we're supposed to get to know one another, get to learn about each other's cultures. The lesson that we can learn and ponder over is that, my dear respected brothers and sisters, racism is still prevailing. It's outraging. Just about 50 years ago, less or a little bit more than 50 years ago, they had the Brown versus the Board of Education Supreme Court case, in which they finally decided we're not going to segregate the blacks from the whites in schools. We're not going to have separate transportations for them. We're not going to have separate drinking fountains for them. We're not going to have separate, living spaces for them. We're not going to have separate neighborhoods for them. Just 60 years ago, this country that claims to be a country of progression and advancements, and whereas 1400 years ago and more, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught this ummah that you are all equal. You are all equal. And it's been more than a half a century that there has been a declaration of human rights. And so many sacrifices were made in this country to bring civil rights. Martin Luther King Jr. How much sacrifice and him and his people made to just bring equality between the African Americans and the whites. Right? And even though, like I said, we're living in a progressive age, we claim to be, but there's so much prejudice. There's so much superiority in race, and it can be felt in the hearts. It can be seen in the media. And it has not been it's not too late until it hasn't been too old that we saw in the news that how the authorities and the police officers were, showing that racial superiority when they were dealing with other races. We are all very much aware of that, right? And like I said, that division and segregation, the law can only treat its symptoms. The law can only control the people to a certain extent, but it has not treated the root cause, which is the arrogance in the hearts, which is the prejudice in the hearts. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, in a matter of 23 years, he destroyed this prejudice from the hearts of Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, who were divided into tribes, divided absolutely. And they used to look down upon one another due to lineage. And they could not look beyond a person's skin color. And how Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when Mecca was conquered, and all the idols were broken, and then the adhan was ordered to be called, he told Bilal radiyallahu anhu, who was from a very low status profile in the society, to stand on the top of Mecca, the Kaaba, which was the pride of the Arabs. If they had an idol for pride, it was Kaaba in their hearts. They took pride in the Kaaba, that we are the people of Mecca. We take care, we are the custodians of Kaaba. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam shattered and crushed that idol by making Bilal radiyallahu anhu stand on the top of it and told him to call out adhan in front of everyone. A black slave who was freed by Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu is standing on the top of Kaaba in front of all the Arabs, and now he's giving adhan. What an honor. And in that moment, one mushrik, Harith bin Hisham, Sufyan, who was not a Muslim at that time, radiyallahu anhu, were standing and seeing that. One mushrik said, I am so happy my father died before he saw this. Harith bin Hisham, who was a mushrik, he said, could not Muhammad find anyone better than this black crow to stand on the Kaaba and give the adhan? And Sufyan radiyallahu anhu said, I fear to utter anything lest the Lord of Muhammad or the heavens will inform him. Who knows, maybe because of this fear Allah gave him hidayah. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam called those two people that, did you say this? Nobody told him. Allah informed him. And then this verse was revealed. Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. I have created you from one father, one mother, one male, one female. And that is why Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam stood in his last khutbah, addressing the entire Arabian Peninsula. Remember, the society that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam found Not even for one day was an Arabian society. It was purely based on La ilaha illallah, nothing else. Nobody was given superiority because of their wealth, race, skin color. No. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam stood in that khutbah and he addressed all the people who were there. And then he told them that النَّاسُ كُلُّهُمْ بَنُو آدَمْ. Every single person, the entire mankind is from Adam. وَآدَمْ خُلِقَ مِن تُرَابٍ. And Adam is from dust. He is made from dirt. He returned everyone back to their origin. Told them where you have come from, where you belong. And that's why Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in another hadith, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَنظُرُ إِلَىٰ وُجُوهِكُمْ وَلَا إِلَىٰ صُوَرِكُمْ. Allah does not look at the beauty of our faces, the adornment that we wear, our clothes. وَلَا إِلَىٰ صُوَرِكُمْ. He does not look at our physical appearances. وَلَكِنْ rather يَنظُرُ إِلَىٰ مَا فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. He looks at what is deep down inside your heart. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he treated the root cause of racism, which was in the hearts. And today, the laws, they cannot treat that. They can only control the symptoms of racism. But it's still like, it's rampant. It's outraging. And how many times in our gatherings, as parents, when we speak about a certain race, we speak in such a manner that the child from his young age, he gets this message that, these people, they're inferior to us. Or we as a community sometimes look at another masjid, another community and say, well, they're from that background, so we're definitely, a step ahead, or just, we have an edge on them. In the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are all equal except by piety. Then, he says after that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala interestingly, He said, Min dhakari wa untha. I've created you from one male and one female. In other words, there are only two genders. There is no, the list just keeps increasing every single year. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has kept it simple. He's like, keep it simple. I've only created from one mother and one father. And without a mother and father, you would not even be existent. So, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. And I've created you into nations and tribes so that you may appreciate one another, get to know one another. Inna akramakum, verily the most honorable amongst you in the eyes of Allah is atqakum, the one who has the most taqwa. Does anyone know what is taqwa? Would anyone like to just translate? And if someone were to ask you, brother, what is taqwa? It's okay. It's okay to be wrong. You can still answer. Makhafatullah. Okay. God consciousness, yes. Yes, good. These are all correct answers. Anyone else? Okay. I want to point towards that aspect of taqwa that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam has mentioned in the hadith. He held the hand of Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu one time like this. And he said, I'm going to give 5 advices. Who is going to take them from me? Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu stepped forward. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam grabbed his hand like this, and he gave him 5 major advices. One of those advices he gave him, and this reminds me, Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu narrated this hadith to his students in the same manner like this. He held their hand, I believe. And then their students taught this hadith to their students like this. They held their hand. The same manner that it had been since Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu. And it was so beautiful that one time I was sitting in Tirmidhi class, and my teacher, when he was about to teach this hadith, he called a student forward. He said, give me your hand. And he held his hand, and then he gave him the same advice that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave to Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu. One of those advices that he gave was, ittaqil maharim takun a'bad ad-nas. We all want to become the biggest worshippers, the most pious person. We strive for it. We sacrifice for it. What do? We try to worship more and more. More nawafil, more tilawa, more sadaqah, more fasting. The fasting of the summer days, which are so long, you become exhausted. But Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if you want to become the biggest worshipper, that's not the way. That is one of the ways, but that is not the mainstream. That's not the main way you can become the biggest worshipper. He said, ittaqil maharim, stay away from the haram, you'll become the biggest worshipper in the eyes of Allah. So, in taqwa, it actually means to be a pious person who's upright. It means the person who stays the most away from sins. So the most honorable person in the eyes of Allah is not the one who excels in ibadah, is the one who excels in staying away from sins. You may pray your 5 times salah. You may just read 1 page of Quran a day. You may just do 100 times La ilaha illallah. That's it. 2 rakahs of qiyam before you sleep. I cannot do more than that. But when it comes to backbiting, you zip your lips. When it comes to gatherings of haram, you walk away from those gatherings. When it comes to holding ill feelings in your heart, you say, no, I have to stay away from that. When it comes to deceiving other people, you're the farthest away from that. When it comes to hurting other people, controlling this, you're the farthest away from that. You are the biggest worshipper in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So really, piety is abstinence from sins. And in today's time and age, Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanwi rahimahullah mentioned this, I believe, and I heard this from my teacher. He said, a youngster in these time and ages, if he is doing 3 things, this is just a quote from my teacher, he is the biggest friend of Allah, the Waliullah. He is the Junaid Baghdadi of our time. Junaid Baghdadi was a very big saint, Waliullah of his time. If a youngster in our time, he's performing his 5 times salah on time. He is guarding his gaze from lustful glances and haram. 3rd thing, he's staying away from major sins. My teacher said, in today's time and age, I believe he's the biggest wali of Allah. He's the biggest friend of Allah. So when you go to your high school, your college, your work, you have the opposite genders around you. You have, commercials on your phone. You're driving, there are billboards. There's so much haram that is around us. If you can just do the utmost effort to stay away from that, and you have the minimal amount of ibadah, you're the biggest worshipper in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The most honorable in the eyes of Allah is the one who has the most taqwa. Inna Allah alimun khabir. And Allah is the most knowing and the most aware. One time, a man passed by Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Right? It's a very, very interesting story. A man passed by Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He asked the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum that, what is your opinion about this man? So they said that this man is from the most noble people of the society. If he proposes to a family, his proposal will be readily accepted. All the people who are not married would love to be from that, Your proposal goes anywhere and boom, you get an acceptance right away. Right? In khataba an yunkah. In shafa' and yushafa', if he speaks up for someone, his speech is accepted readily. If he intercedes on behalf of someone, he writes a recommendation letter, boom, it's accepted. And then another man passed by. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, what do you think about this man? Sahaba radiyallahu anhum said, if he proposes anywhere, he will not even get an answer back. We're not interested. And then if he speaks up for someone, intercedes for someone, writes a recommendation letter in our time's age, is not even looked at. Right? And if he speaks in qala, la yusma, nobody listens to him. 2 men, right? One has no say in society. He is considered to be not very influential. Right? He's not very wealthy. And the other one is influential. He's handsome. He has a say in society. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, the second one, about whom you said, his proposal won't be accepted, nobody listens to him, he has no say in society. This man, he is so high in the eyes of Allah, so valuable in the eyes of Allah because of his taqwa, that this other man who is so influential, if the entire world was to be filled with him, would not equivalent to this one single person. That هَذَا خَيْرٌ مِّن مِلْءِ الْأَرْضِ مِثْلِ هَذَا. So our statuses are not because of our clothes, our cars, our say, our influence, our likes, our following. No. Inna Allah alimun khabir. Allah is all knowing of truly who has taqwa, khabir, and He is all aware. قالت الأعراب آمنا. قالت الأعراب آمنا. That these nomadic Arab tribes, they said that we have brought iman. These were verses revealed about Banu Asad, who came and they accepted Islam because there was so much poverty. There's so much drought. They came to Medina Munawwara and they said, they accepted Islam readily because they saw that if we accept Islam, we will benefit from the funds of the Muslims. We will benefit from their community. We will receive the support that we need in these hard times. So, قالت الأعراب. Arabiyun in the Arabic language is used for that person that lives in the villages. He's a nomad. And Arabiyun is used for a person who lives in the city, right? He lives in the city, right? He lives in a community. And that is why Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is called an Arabiyun. We will never say he was an Arabiyun. He was not a nomad. Just a linguistic point. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that tell them, قُلْ لَمْ تُؤْمِنُوا, that you have not brought iman yet. وَلَكِنْ, rather say, قُولُوا أَسْلَمْنَا, that we have only brought Islam. That you are claiming that you have brought iman, but rather you have only brought Islam. What is the difference between Islam and iman, my dear brothers and sisters? Islam, it is the outward submission. It is the outward acts of submission by which a person can say he is Muslim. And one time Jibreel alayhi salam, he came to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam in the form of a man, and he sat in front of him and he asked him, Mal Islam, what is Islam? He said, An tuqim as-salah wa tu'ti az-zakah wa tasuma Ramadan wa tahujj al-bayt in istata'. That if you perform the 5 pillars, you are considered a Muslim. Then he asked, what is Iman? He said, An tu'mina billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi wal yawm al-akhir wal ba'thi ba'd al-maut wal qadri khayrihi wa sharrihi min Allah ta'ala. That Iman is your firm belief in the heart. And in the Arabic language we say, Tasdeequn bil lisan, Iqrarun bil lisan, wa tasdeequn bil qalb. It is the affirmation of the tongue is called Islam. But is a person truly mu'min? Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. And truly, my dear brothers and sisters, many of us, we identify as Muslims. But are we mu'min in the eyes of Allah? Has my heart affirmed with full conviction that my success of this life and the hereafter and the entire mankind's salvation lies in the sunnah of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam? Has your heart affirmed this or not? This is the question. And this brings me to the topic of the challenge between Islam and modernism. The challenge between pure Islam and liberalism. Before I explain this topic to you, it's very important, and it's at the same time very difficult to summarize in the time that I have, but I will try my best. In order for you to understand this, you have to listen to this story to understand the background of what is liberalism. What is the concept of liberalism? You see, every single one of us, we have a comprehensive doctrine. What is a comprehensive doctrine? In other words, it's the way we look at the world. It is the shades, the eyeglasses, the lenses every single one of us is wearing. Right? Every single one of us has a set of belief by which we look at the world. Now you have to understand what is the lens of the idea of liberalism. Right? The philosophy of liberalism. If you can understand this, you might realize that you and I are not looking at the world as we should be as Muslims, through the lens of Anbiya, through the lens of Islam. We are looking at the world through the lens of liberalists. What is their history basically? To understand this, imagine a person who was born in the times of Greeks. I'm afraid I will lose some of you in this story, but you have to follow along, right? Every single one of us is facing this challenge. We're living in it, we're breathing in it. Imagine a person who was born in the time of Greeks, when they had a democratic government. They had the freedom to express their opinions however they liked, right? And there are a lot of philosophers, there are a lot of freedom. And this person, he's living in that society. And then afterwards came along Christianity. So now this person, he looks at Christianity and he sees that it's now it's starting to conflict with his beliefs. It's starting to conflict with his freedom. And the church, which was in the Europe, the Catholic Church, it was massive. It had power over everything. It controlled the ideas. It told you what to think, what not to think. It told you that you can only do this and not do this. That you have to follow exactly the way what we're telling you. And if you cross that limit, you're going to be exiled, you'll be cancelled, and no one will give you any sort of value. So this was the church. So this person looks at the church and he says, that this is a big conflict, And what happened, that when people made scientific discoveries like Galileo, we all have studied about him in our schools, the church completely banished him. They imprisoned him in his home. And anyone who would try to make some sort of progress, the church would try to control it. That, hey, you're getting out of our hands. You're getting out of our limits that we have set. So what happened? People got fed up with the church because it was greedy. It wanted to control everybody. It wanted to control all the wealth. It wanted to control the government. It wanted to, unrightfully control everything out of greed of power. So people fought. This man, Martin Luther, came, not Martin Luther King Jr., Martin Luther came in the 1500s, and he said, you know what? We are separating the church from the government. And everybody now had a bad taste of the church. Follow along. This person, he's seeing all of this. So now the church is put in a corner and the church is told, hey, you're not allowed to come and interfere in our government, in our lives. You go preach, you go do what you want, keep your religion to your church, don't bring it in our lives, in our government, in our society. So now the church has been separated. There's a bad taste of church, and everyone looks at the church as a hardliner, as a cruel, authority. So now then, there was the monarchy at that time. The monarchy was pretty much equivalent to the church. The kings, they controlled everybody. The feudal system. Everybody was owned by the king. He could do with them whatever he wanted. So people got fed up with that. They fought back the monarchy, and the monarchy lost. Until this time today, it's like a drama, really. There's no importance for them. And so the church lost, the monarchy lost, and now they have the Renaissance in Europe. So now they started to come about with new ideas, new philosophies, and that's where atheism, it started to go on a high rise. And then you imagine this person, he went through the Greeks, right? The Greeks. Then he saw the church, right, being banished, separated from the government. And then he saw the monarchy, it lost. And then imagine he moved with all of these people to the USA. So this idea came about that we have the liberty to live the way we want. As humans, we have the inherent freedom to do whatever we want, and no one has the right to tell me what to do, what not to do. And if you're going to, then you better have an answer for why. If you're the government, you're going to tell me don't do this, you better have a reason why. If you're my father and you're going to tell me don't do this, then you better have a reason why. Just because you're my father, you're an authority, I'm not going to follow you. If Allah tells me don't do this, just because He is Allah, I don't have to follow Him. Because liberalism, it preaches the idea that every human has the freedom to do whatever they want. And if any authority is going to tell them that don't do this and do this, then they better have a real reason as to why we should do this and we should not do this. This is the idea that has been ingrained in our children's minds. Though they're learning their education, but in the background, they are being programmed with this ideology. And I am a witness of this because I went through this entire education system. I was a hafiz, I came out of public school, I went to madrasa, I was heavily programmed. And it took 6 and 5 years or even more, and I cannot say I'm completely deprogrammed. It took a large amount of time to clarify that mind and start to think from the lens of a Muslim. And what is the lens of a Muslim? That we are not free by our inherent right. We are the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We will do what Allah will command us through the Anbiya alayhimus salam, and we will follow the footsteps of Anbiya alayhimus salam. And if they tell us this is right and this is wrong, we will submit ourselves. And this is La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. This is our lens. And our parents' generation, who are living in the post-World War era, where they saw the world change, they saw the victors and they saw the losers. And now the impression was put upon them that if you want to be the victors, you want to be the heroes, you want to be the strong people, you have to follow the winners of the world war, meaning the Western society. So many of our parents, they migrated to the West. That, hey, we got to go get educated over there if we want to be like them. We have to follow their lifestyle if we want to be like them. And our religion and these scholars and Islam is the one that's holding us back. But that's not the case. That is their history. Their church was holding them back. Their monarchy was holding them back. But Islam never held back people. Rather, the Muslims progressed, reached pinnacles and peaks that humanity never reached in medicine, in architect, right? In history, you name it. In every aspect of education, in field, Muslims were the pioneers. Islam never held them back. But the Western people, they imposed this idea on us through our politicians, through so many other propagandas, that the one who's holding you back is Islam. It's the masjid. It's the scholars. So now we develop that distaste. We develop that distaste. Our parents have this. Their parents have this. And they're passing it on to their children. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told them that, say you have brought Islam, but Iman has not entered your heart yet. My dear brothers, this is eye-opening. Many of us identify as Muslims, but the question is, do we identify in the eyes of Allah as believers who affirm in the authority of Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And this is the idea of secularism. That if there is an environment where there is deen and Allah is telling don't do this, and these are the limits. Secularism is the idea that you create a space within that and you say, hey, this space is mine and I'm going to control and say what is moral, what is right, what is wrong, what are the limits. Deen is not going to tell me or control that. I have the liberty and freedom to decide that for myself. And that is how colonialism, when Muslim countries were divided and Europe took over those countries and divided them through colonialism, they imposed this idea on them. But till this day, Muslims, they are holding themselves back from this. And that is where there's drift. There's challenge between these two ideologies. Today it's a war of ideologies. I hope I was able to clarify, as this is a concept which is very deep and it takes time to understand. But the moral that we're getting from here is that lip service is not enough to make us Muslims in the mu'min in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rather, it demands action. And in the next few verses, we will learn 3 conditions that Allah has made in this verse. In order to be a true mu'min in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we must bring these 3 conditions, 3 qualities into our lives. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to benefit from whatever has been said. And if there was anything wrong or incorrect, it was from my nafs. And whatever correct was said, it was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jazakumullahu khairan.
Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum. If you have any questions, we have an index card. You can write down your question. If sisters want any index card, my wife is there. We can pass it on. And as we are coming towards the end of the session, we have, as per Sheikh, we have a couple of more classes. Sheikh, we have one more class to go to complete or two more?
Yes, we have one more, inshallah.
One more, inshallah. And next week we have Eid on Wednesday, so we'll skip the class next week and then we'll follow the following week, right? So the last class of Surah Hujurat will be